Australia is a unique continent that has been developing on its own path for a long time, without outside interference. When the Europeans landed on it, they began to explore new lands, taking with them animals that had not been found on this continent before. And then unexpected problems appeared. The native fauna of Australia is poor, but at the same time very original. More than 80% of the animals are endemic, that is, they are not found anywhere else. Among them are kangaroos, koalas, platypuses and many other unique individuals. With the arrival of visitors from other continents, the local fauna has significantly enriched, but it did not benefit Australia's local animals. Animals brought from other lands eventually turned into a serious problem requiring categorical actions that clearly do not fit into the heads of animal rights activists. Many people know the story of rabbits that bred incredibly quickly and harmed both farmers' crops and wild grasses. They are considered the cause of the extinction of many species of Australian animals and the catalyst for erosion of Australian soils. And their population reached up to 600 million individuals, and it was not fences and shooting, as many believe, that helped to keep them from spreading further. And not a lot of biological weapons in the form of a myxomatosis virus imported from South America. However, they adapted to this later, but today is not about that. Now I will tell you about the lesser-known inhabitants of Australia who arrived from afar, camels. Surely not many people knew that they were there at all, and even in such large numbers. For the first time I touched on this topic in a video about a city in the center of Australia, Alice Springs. And now it's time to tell about it in more detail, as this story deserves special attention. French geographer of Danish origin Conrad Maltbrun advised to bring camels to Australia back in the early 1820s. The advantage of these animals was obvious. The ability to work where the arid desert climate, ease of management, low price compared to horses from the UK, endurance, in difficult weather conditions and so on. In general, it seemed that this was an ideal option for Australia. As a result, the first camel landed on the continent in 1840. 6 individuals were sent from the Canary Islands to Australia, but survived, only one succeeded, Harry. The rest did not reach the foreign land. But the real use of camels began later, in 1860, in 1861. Camels purchased in South Asia participated in the Burke and Wills expedition. The purpose of which was to cross the continent from Melbourne in the south to the Gulf of Carpentaria in the north. With Inland Land Survey, state government, Victoria imported 24 one-humped camel dromedar for this expedition and hired several drivers. And although the expedition was tragic, Burke and Willis died during it, it was not in vain. Firstly, the picture of the interior of Australia was supplemented, the myth of the inland sea of the continent was divorced. Rescue groups sent from different parts of the continent also brought clarity to the understanding of unexplored territories. Well, camels, despite the outcome of the expedition, proved to be irreplaceable animals for the development of the inland lands of the arid continent. Between 1870 and 1900, at least 15,000 camels and several thousand drovers arrived in Australia. In this vein, it is worth paying attention to the drivers without whom camels would be useless animals. All of them were called Afghans. Although not all of them were from Afghanistan. The teamsters came from different territories of present-day India, Egypt, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and each trip to Australia could bring a fortune began to circulate in the East towards the end of the 19th century. Many went there despite the dangers that awaited them. White Australians treated the so-called Afghans not much better than camels, but the need for care and the ability to handle camels made them necessary labor migrants. The contract was usually signed for several years, after which, the teamsters were expelled from the country and hired new ones. The desire of visitors to stay in Australia forever was categorically not welcomed. It was believed that the influx of migrants from Asia threatened the integrity of the English population of the country. So Asians, who were treated as camel drivers, were even forbidden to marry representatives of others, Rus, but there were exceptions. First of all, camels were used to transport goods, and they were especially valued in the interior of the continent. By the way, it was the camels and their drivers who discovered this very Australian outback. With their help, a 500-kilometer pipeline was built, which is part of the Goldfields water supply system, providing fresh water to the settlement in the gold mines of Western Australia. An overland telegraph line has been erected, a railway has been laid from the port of Gasta to Alice Springs, and other important projects have been implemented linking the entire continent into a single whole. But in the history of the state, their activities are almost not mentioned. But time passed, laws changed, and progress did not stand still. Thus, the introduction of the Migration Restriction Act of 1901 and the White Australia policy made it difficult for camel drivers to enter the country and complicated the lives of the remaining Afghans, many of whom were eventually forced to leave Australia. In the 1920s, in recent years, the number of working camels has reached a peak, about 20,000. Motorized transport in the 1920s, the tasks performed by camels went to more technologically advanced rail and road transport. Many camels were released into the wild, where they began to multiply rapidly. In the late 1980s, the processing of camel meat, which boasts a high protein content, began at the slaughterhouse in the town of Alice Springs. Since 2014, farms engaged in the production of camel meat have begun to appear milk intended for human nutrition. But now the time has come that there are so many camels that they have become a problem. The current population of wild camels in Australia has more than 1 million individuals. This is the largest population of second feral camels in the world. They mainly live in the central desert part of Australia, where the majority of the population are Aborigines. Camels disrupt the balance of the fragile local ecosystem. They move in huge herds of up to 1,000 individuals, eat and trample everything that can be used in food is drained, and fresh water sources are polluted. So thirsty camels can easily drink 100 liters at a time, but imagine if there are a shortage of water for other animals in Australia and even for people. So local Aborigines often complain that camels in search of water and food ravage their lands. In order to calm the situation somehow, the government periodically decides to shoot animals. The most massive culling was carried out from 2009 to 2013. Then, in order to control the number, a total of more than 160,000 heads were destroyed. Since then, culling of animals has been taking place regularly. Basically, the shooting is carried out from helicopters. During a day of work, several groups of professional shooters can destroy up to 1,000 heads. Such operations are carried out in emergency cases. Because due to drought and lack of water, animals are capable of causing serious damage to any water sources, such as cranes, wells, pipelines, pumps. They are even attracted to moisture condensed by air conditioners and cesspools. In search of life-giving moisture, camels often trample each other, behave aggressively towards cattle and people. And it is not difficult to overcome wire fences for such large and thirsty animals. Unfortunately, camels have repeated the fate of many other animals brought to Australia. And the whole point is that in Australia either has no predators capable of restraining the reproduction of imported animals, or there is no serious competition with local species. What primarily affects endemic flora and fauna and agricultural land? Could it have turned out differently? Probably not. The same dingo dog was brought to Australia thousands of years before the Europeans. Secondly, many imported animals solved serious tasks of that time. For example, rabbits, now recognized as serious pests, provided colonists with meat in Australia and really helped feed thousands of Australians during the Great Depression. As for camels, it was difficult to imagine more adapted. There were simply no alternatives to the climate of animals and to explore and develop the interior of the continent. Well, in the end, people could not and did not want to foresee the consequences of the actions they committed. So Thomas Austin, who is credited with starting the large-scale spread of rabbits, said, "The release of a small number of rabbits into the wild will not cause harm, can not only contribute to hunting, but also to the creation of home comfort." Of course, he could not have thought then that the 24 rabbits he released would turn into 600 million, that's all friends. Be sure to share this video. If you liked it, write comments and put likes. Bye bye to everyone.